Look at this. I feel like a teacher. This is so fantastic. So my name is Brandon Kaler, and I'm a principal program manager with Microsoft. I work in security. And when I was 16, I told my family that I desperately wanted to be a rock star. And this is back in the 80s. So I've played in bands for pretty much my whole life. I've never, ever had this many people turn out for one of my rock band shows. So you guys are helping me fulfill. Thank you guys. I love it. So we are not talking about rock music hardly at all today. We're going to be talking about securing exchange from modern threats. This is the high-level agenda. We're going to talk about protecting yourself. This is the due diligence, to be the Boy Scout. And then we're going to talk about breaches, and that's far and away my favorite part of this. Changing it up a little bit this year. Traditionally, at this session, I've demoed attacks, right? I've done attacker tools and so forth. I think you guys are, I don't want to say tired of seeing that, but it's been a few years of that. So I'm going to demo hunting today. So it's hunting is complicated, and the demo is maybe not as deep as I would normally like. But the good news is that the heart of this is going to be on the breach stuff. So we're going to be talking about a breach of on-prem exchange. How many of you manage some sort of on-prem exchange component? Yes, you guys are going to love this part. I can't wait. Yeah, it still exists. Yes, exactly. We're going to talk about partners, people who help you migrate your stuff from one cloud to the other, or from on-prem to Exchange, or from on-prem to Exchange Online. We're going to talk about insiders. I'm sure you guys have detected a note of consistency in Microsoft's messaging about insiders, insider threats. And we're going to talk about native tools, which is to say things that you have to use to manage cloud services that attackers use to do naughty things to you. So that's the high-level agenda. All right, so let's kick off with protecting yourself. So we think about technology or risk as being in one of three buckets. See how fast that slide went? People, technology, and process. So technology, a lot of focus on that. There's a ton of threat protection, configuration management, and so forth. We invest a lot in that, and it's kind of your first line of defense against all these bad guys. Your people are a big risk vector for you. I'm sure all of you have had to deal with phishing attacks, and that's all your users. You guys should watch my previous session where I go into excruciating detail about just how you can help those users be less bad at clicking phishing links. That last bucket is process, and that's all you. So how you construct your security operations and security management workflows, and how you improve those over time, and how you measure efficacy and so forth, that's all you. Microsoft aspires to help you make that process better and more fulsome. And so that's how we think about risk. So all the stuff we're going to talk about today in terms of protecting yourself largely falls in one of those three buckets, and really largely in that technology bucket. All right, so recent attack stats. You'll note here that employee carelessness is the winner. Winner, winner, chicken dinner, all the way on the left. And so training your people how to not do bad behavior should be very high on your list. Successful email phishing attack, which I would argue is a variant of employee carelessness. So now we're up to over 100% on that. All the things that are on this list, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe even 6 are related to human beings in some form or fashion, right? So you don't get to 0 days until 7 out there. So the problem that you're dealing with in security isn't just am I patched? Do I have the right configuration in place? But a holistic process where you have to think about the people that are involved in this. And that those people, by the way, include you as administrators, right? So this is the modern kill chain. How many of you have seen this or some variant of this before? Most of you, okay. So I'll go through this relatively quickly. Attackers are somewhat predictable in what they do. They do kind of the same thing for almost all of their victims. They have a set of tactics, and those tactics include reconnaissance, where they try to figure out where the vulnerabilities are, an initial breach vector, which can be phishing or password spray, app consent grant, and so forth, a way in the door. And that usually is just, how do I get one credential? Then they try to elevate their privileges, which is to say they try to go from Joe Schmo user up to somebody with some power in the company's ecosystem. There's a bunch of different ways that they do that. Some of these, by the way, are functionally unpreventable, right? So if you have an account in an organization, you can enumerate all the other accounts in that organization. That's information that you can use. You can take that list of people and use that to password spray them or phish them again or whatever, get more accounts. You can usually enumerate the administrators in an organization as well. So if you know who the guys with power are, you can target them, and after some time and some creativity, usually compromise one of their accounts as well. Once they do that, they entrench themselves so that it makes it more difficult for you to eject them. The platforms are used extensively to affect that entrenchment in the form of mail forwarding rules, delegation, folder permissions, forms injection, which is a little known, much more nefarious version of rule injection, and doing things like basically hacking the Outlook homepage to have malicious code behind it. And the last thing they do is they steal your data and they steal your money. So that's exfiltration. Those kill chains are fairly complete, and they have a fairly predictable life cycle, and they can live on-prem, and they can live in the cloud, and they can live in both places, and they can live in neither places, and so forth. So you can't focus all of your efforts on-prem or in the cloud. You have to feel fluent with both, and your threat protection stack, the way that you prevent, the way that you detect, the way that you investigate, and the way that you respond, needs to integrate all those components together. So the basics of defense. These are the things that you pretty much have to do. You have to have some sort of access controls, and that includes primarily multi-factor authentication, and I would emphasize for your admins. If you do not have multi-factor authentication for your administrative roles, you're gonna get breached. I mean, you're gonna get breached anyway, but it'll be way, way worse. So go and turn on MFA for your admins. I know they'll hate it. There'll be 1,000 reasons why not. Suck it up, gotta do it. Technologies like PIM and PAM to do just-in-time elevation and just enough elevation, and best practice recommendations like alternate admin accounts for ID segmentation. Those are all really great ways to reduce the risk of any one account in your environment being breached and that being used to move laterally and to elevate your privilege. Secondly, here's trust boundary. This is a weird one. There's certain trust boundary concepts that live in the cloud, like role-based access control and conditional access, but there's a lot of that lives on-prem. So network segmentation, the way that you manage your domains, so that you don't have production services living on the same network segments or the same domain as your end users, or as the networks that you have that are open to the public internet. This is it's an important basic hygiene lesson. It's very idiosyncratic. It's very difficult to tell a company this is how you should do your trust boundaries. Just know that there is something that you should have done about your trust boundaries. Fourth thing on here is really about data. Telemetry is the answer to all the technology problems. Being able to recite what it is that the bad guys are doing, have insight into that, enables all the detections, all the investigation, all the response stuff. You should be using, if you're in Office 365, you should be consuming data from the Activity API. You should have some sort of threat protection stack, and you should probably have some sort of CASB or SIEM that you're using. So for us, the MTP, M365 MTP, and Microsoft Cloud App Solution is kind of our native solutions for that. Azure Sentinel, which I'll actually demo a little bit later. Those are important, and you should become fluent with the data that's being emitted from Office. So I think a lot of us are familiar with client telemetry. There's a lot of effort put into consuming logs from computers that live inside your network and doing stuff with that. You have to do the same thing in the cloud. And then lastly, policy management. Configuration and gaps in that configuration are exploited enormously by bad guys. And so having an approach, especially in the cloud, for how you're going to enumerate all the possible configurations and make a choice about which configurations you want in which way, and then how you manage and monitor that over time is important. So the Secure Score and Compliance Score are really great ways to do that. Security and compliance, by the way, A lot of business leaders, most of us in here are security minded. Actually, are there any compliance folks in the room? Don't be shy. You can raise your hand. No, almost none. Okay. So the security people have a really clear vision about what good security looks like. Compliance people have a really good picture of how good security turns into business value, right? It's how a company is able to do business. And so they're intertwined in a way. Security guys have more empathy for the compliance guys. They have a hard job, and providing data for them so that they can prove that certain configurations are in place and so forth is really important. So security score and compliance score, they go together like wine and what goes with wine? Chocolate? Wine and chocolate. Yeah, and I'll let you decide which is which. Okay. Today I'm not going to show you any of that. So you guys can go look and find out how to do all those basics in a billion other places, a bunch of talks even at this conference. Threat hunting is advanced, and so I'm going to try to demo an advanced thing, and it is important to be able to use something like threat hunting to defend against the types of attacks that I'm going to be talking about today. So, a couple notes here. These are like FYIs, if you will. There are 4 high-level announcements that Microsoft has made here, more or less in the Exchange ecosystem. Mail reads telemetry is available now in the E5 SKU, the Advanced Security SKU. So what that allows you to do is when you are breached and bad guys steal your data, in the past you had no way to tell which particular pieces of content that the bad guys had stolen. Most of you have some sort of regulatory regime that requires you to report when specific pieces of data are breached, like when they're read, right? If you're HIPAA compliant, for example, you have to report it when like medical records are exposed. So without mail reads telemetry, you were forced to basically say all the content associated with this user has been exposed because you couldn't enumerate that. Mail reads telemetry allows you to figure out whether sensitive content has actually been exposed. Basic auth is being deprecated, which is to say it's not going to be enabled by default in anywhere in the ecosystem. So a lot of you have dependencies on basic auth for certain types of clients, like maybe not non-Microsoft native clients, like iOS Mail and things. And so you need to start planning for that basic auth to not be on by default. So there will always be exceptions to this rule, but basic auth is a big danger zone. While it's the case that those credentials that are transmitted over basic auth are not usually transmitted in plain text because those connections are almost always encrypted with TLS, the fact of the matter is it is difficult to put MFA on a basic auth connection. It requires an app password. And so a lot of people don't adopt it because their users are like, why am I having to manage this other weird one-off app password to do this? And so they're just like, never mind. Disable basic auth, you garner all the benefits of modern auth, including conditional access and the rest of the things in the modern auth stack. You close out a vector for legacy protocols like EWS, hence see the EWS protocol end-of-lifing, and you make it so that attackers can't just password spray your EWS endpoints all day long to steal your account credentials. And the last thing here is MTP, and it's interesting. Threat protection has been a complicated ecosystem for a long time. It's been divided up into a bunch of different buckets. Microsoft has heard loud and clear that you guys want this stuff integrated. And so MTP, Microsoft 365 Threat Protection, brings together endpoints, all the cloud management and Microsoft Cloud App Security and all the email and phishing stuff into one threat investigation, threat management, and remediation tool. So yay. Okay, this is just to sort of tee up a little bit the next section. I think about threat actors in one of 4 buckets, internal and external, and then non-malicious and malicious. And when I say non-malicious, I don't mean that what they're doing isn't bad. I just mean that they don't mean it necessarily. What they're doing is usually bad. It's like bad for them and bad for you, but they don't intend it. So internal non-malicious users are users that have been phished, right? They're people who make a mistake and, I don't know, delete the whatever. An administrator who fat fingers a command and takes down the whole network or whatever. External non-malicious folks are usually partners, people who you've hired to go do something for you, and they screw it up somehow, right? They leave a spreadsheet on a blob store in AWS somewhere. Malicious internal are insiders, and malicious external are advanced persistent threats, and those can be state actors or criminal organizations. So we're going to talk about basically everyone but the phished users. So we're going to talk about insiders, partners, and advanced persistent threats. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about no hats today, all cattle, on-prem exchange, partners, insiders, and native tools. I just noticed I have a translator over here. I've never had that before. You're helping me live out my rock star dreams even more. I love it. Okay, so I want to talk about a breach that happened earlier this year, and it's actually just an identified instance of the breach. We think it's actually happened in a lot more places. This all comes from this brilliant WeLiveSecurity.com ESCT white paper called Light Neuron. I really encourage you to go read it because it is fascinating. If you're even a tiny bit of a security nerd, this thing is dope. But I'm going to give you the high level of it. So what happened? So all these are going to be framed like there's an adversary, there's a victimology, and then there's tools and tactics. So the adversary in this case is a Russian threat actor called Turla, Snake, Waterbug, White Bear, Krypton, et cetera, et cetera. These guys all have totally sweet names, which I guess could be good rock band names now that I think about it. They're based in Russia. And there's a bunch of reasons why we think that, which this white paper sort of lays out. And they think they've had successful breaches of victims in 45 countries, and basically in the most hardened targets. So embassies, military installations, education, research, big pharma, and so forth. They go after very targeted organizations. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, organizations, regional political organizations, in particular in Europe, and defense contractors. If you're in one of these buckets, you should be thinking about Russian state actors like this, right? How they work is they start with basics. There's even documented examples of Turla using Metasploit. Metasploit is like actual script kiddie toolkits, right? It's an amazing assessment and configuration management tool, but it is not complicated, and every single threat protection platform out there will detect Metasploit like before you even are done dropping it on the particular box. But they will use it. They do a lot of phishing, do a lot of watering hole. They do some man in the middling in order to get an initial credential somehow. And then they move laterally. They collect creds like crazy. They do custom malware that allow them to communicate from inside your organization to outside your organization without you noticing. They typically hide in HTTPS traffic, but they have been known to use DNS and other things which are normal outbound traffic calls. Use a lot of alternate accounts. They target web servers, which usually sit in some sort of boundary or DMZ in your organizations. They often have a lot of 0 days. So you've got a web server, maybe it's got some web app on it, maybe it hasn't been patched in a little while, and then boom, 0 day, right? Deserialization, some sort of injection into some form on some page somewhere. They pop those boxes and they use that as a routing, as a way for all the other internal stuff to route their traffic to that particular box. And they use SATCOM IPs to exfil out to C2. So it's hard to, you're like, where do SATCOM IPs live? It's not really a country, it's space, right? So how does it work? In this case, we actually don't know how they got to the cool part, which we're about to talk about, which was a breach of an Exchange server. But we suspect that it's like that kill chain that I talked about earlier. Some sort of initial breach where they stole somebody's creds. They figured out how to get malware on a particular client. They harvest creds, they move laterally, they elevate their privilege, and eventually they stumble upon either a Forest admin or an Exchange admin that's able to log on to an Exchange server box. And then they do some naughty stuff, which I'm about to talk about, that results in total pwnage. So on the left, you guys may recognize Exchange, right? So this is Exchange on-prem. It's got inbound SMTP, there's a front-end transport service, and then there's a mailbox transport service in the back end. Those two little orange boxes there. What this threat actor did was go out and build custom malware in the form of a mail transport agent. How many of you that are running Exchange on-prem monitor your mail transport agents for change? You guys are geniuses, because maybe you saw this white paper, right? It's just not a really common thing. Like, mail transport agents don't change that often. There's not a ton of use cases to like do stuff with them. The registration process is like 3 PowerShell commands. You literally drop the DLL in the folder, you register the DLL, You enable it, and then away it goes. And then the mail routing just starts to flow through there. So what these bad guys did is they got on this Exchange box as local admin, basically, and they dropped a mail transport agent and a ancillary DLL that the transport agent would call into a folder, registered in the thing, and it basically served as like a native C2 Exchange as bad guy command and control thing. So what it would do is it would take messages that would flow through the mail transport pipeline that had images or PDFs in it from specific attackers, and those messages were encoded with binary commands that the mail transport agent would read and translate into basically implant execution, right? So enumerate all the local process, find all the emails that match some particular subject line or have an attachment, and drop it into this particular folder, and then upload it using this other DLL. So the process is called steganography. This is an example. This Turla is a snake. It's like the testing guys used a snake image to be able to embed this. And this is a binary formatter viewer of that, and there's an embedded binary code in that image, or in a PDF. There's a couple different variants of this. And basically there's instruction codes that would allow you to write a file, delete a file, exfiltrate a file, disable the backdoor for a certain number of minutes if they thought that there was some sort of a investigation pass that was going along. This actually comes with a ton of logging and the ability to manipulate logging, so it can essentially hide in your Exchange logs and so forth. And so when I read this, this blew my mind. Like, this is a mail transport agent that is totally stealthy, that doesn't take commands in a way that's human interpretable, right? It's not like a subject line. You see a lot of mailboxes being used, like a subject line will contain, whatever sort of C2 command, the local malware interpret it to do whatever. This was embedded in an image, and you would look at those images and be like, there's nothing malicious here. It's just like a picture of a cat or a dog or whatever. So amazing, and that's a very sophisticated attack. Difficult to detect, not that hard to get rid of. We'll talk about the defense here. Restricting PowerShell execution is a really great way to stop everything in front of that actual registration of that mail transport agent. So attackers use PowerShell, which is a living off the land technique, in order to do things like extract credentials and to move laterally and so forth. And so if you monitor and manage that, you can insert a lot of friction into it. Privileged access was a key part of this technique. Do you really need that many admins? Do you elevate just in time? Do you de-elevate after short periods? Do you audit all accesses? Do you require MFA? So on and so forth. That would have made that Exchange server much more difficult to breach if I had had that. You should migrate to the cloud. As it turns out, we redeploy Exchange on every box at least every week. And there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Exchange servers that live in the Office 365 cloud. I guarantee there are no Turla mail transport agents that are on any of our boxes. And if they are, they won't last very long there. And then you should understand the threat landscape. This is a really important thing that I think the threat hunting thing helps encourage. Having an attacker mindset is a really great way to understand how to defend against it, right? How to play the game with them. And so there are a couple tools that are available, something called MITRE Attack Matrix. I'll show you guys that in a little while. And threat intel feeds. There's a bunch of publicly available threat intelligence feeds that can help you understand how you're being targeted. And not just at the low level, not just IP addresses and DNS names and things like that, but to really understand specific types of threat actors are making a movement, like they're on a drive or whatever to achieve specific goals that you can be like, okay, I might see phishing, but I also might see password spray. I might see this, I might see that, or whatever. And you need to defend it in that way, not like I need to block all traffic from specific IP addresses, or if I see specific domain name calls, I need to block that. You need to be less tactical, more strategic about how you use your threat intelligence. All right, how am I doing? Oh my God, breach partners. So partners are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. In fact, many of you in this room are probably partners that help organizations do that, do stuff. We think partners are great, and we want you guys to continue to trust partners, but you should just understand that there's some risk involved in that, and that it's risk that you have to manage. So the adversary in this case is that third-party vendor to whom you've paid a lot of money to help you do that thing that you don't typically want to do, and they're generally non-malicious, right? The victimology is you are the victim in this particular case. The tools and tactics that they use are the tools that they have built to manage or migrate mail counter contact docs, to do specific types of integration projects for authentication services, network stuff, a bunch of different things. Anything that really gets in and touches the guts of your IT ecosystem. They require high privilege in order to affect that. They typically use a lot of sensitive data or need sensitive data to do their job. And they are, in almost all cases, although not always, have some sort of cloud component, some like blob storage at the very minimum, where their tool is being used to transact data from here to there and stage it up here and there, whatever. And they're usually multi-tenant. So there's some danger in that, because that means that while they're migrating your mail, they're probably also migrating this other person's mail, and often with a platform that lives in the cloud. And so you have to get some sort of guarantees that they're not going to, for example, put somebody else's mail in your mailbox or vice versa. So your ecosystem is complex, dozens of services, hybrid, multi-cloud. You have relationships with often dozens of vendors at any one time, and they help you do all this stuff. They have people, processes, and tools that are vulnerable in the same way that you have people, processes, and tools that are vulnerable. And so vendors can be phished for credentials in the same way that your users can be phished for credentials. And once the vendor credential is lost, accessing their ecosystem, their automation and so forth means that all that automation that has access to your stuff is now accessible to the attacker, right? So it's a surface area problem. They can steal blob storage keys and so forth. They often have privileged access, which allows them to move laterally into ecosystem A or ecosystem B. There's often bugs. Software is almost never perfect. And so, there's problems that can happen where they might delete data, they might put data in the wrong place, or they might expose data in a way that you really didn't intend. And so what you have to do is manage to the greatest extent that you can the infra that is being used or at play. The more of it that you control, the lower the risk is, or at least you own that risk more than the vendor owns that risk. So if the vendor has cloud infrastructure that they're dependent on, you should ask the question, can I own that cloud infra? So that if you have a breach, I can remove your access and ensure that my staged data or whatever is safe. You can control privileged access. In most cases, migrations, if they're happening against quote unquote front door interfaces, like they're not having to do administration so much as like move mail from one place to another. If there's a way to do it with REST, with the graph APIs, so that their app only has very specific permissions and no other permissions in your ecosystem, you should try to adopt that kind of a model, right? Partners that want service accounts that have global admin or forest admin level permissions, dangerous, right? If they have to do that, that should be very tightly monitored, which takes me to this third point here, audit and monitor everything. That includes actions that the vendor app is taking, right? So have a negotiation with them, be like, your app is doing A, B, and C, we think these are dangerous, you should have telemetry that's emitted, can you ship those logs to us so that we can verify that those things are only happening in the way that we think that they should be happening. And again here, you should understand the threat landscape, which is say, you should attend my talk at Ignite at Friday at 10:15 and learn about all this stuff so that you can know that partners are a threat vector for you. Okay, third one, insiders. This one's really scary to me. So the adversary here is you. So this is from The Shining. I thought these girls were twins when I was doing this search. They're not, as it turns out. And they're still friends now today. I thought it was kind of a cool little story. The victimology, just look in the mirror. It's just you guys. And then the tools and tactics. The only thing that differentiates an insider from a normal, normal operations, like the good stuff that's supposed to happen, is intent. That's the only thing. 2018 white paper reports that over half of organizations had an insider threat incident in the last year. And so the key to understanding insiders is understanding what motives that they have. And so insiders seek money, revenge, and information. So they have excellent knowledge of your defenses. I almost wrote perfect. It's usually not perfect. Insiders are usually caught eventually, but they will be able to evade you for very long periods of time. They have access, they often access private information, phone numbers, photos of other employees that they like or they're angry with or whatever. They often try to hack processes to steal money. They steal data that they want to resell, or they'll do things to make themselves look better, right? Like hacking in the school database to give themselves an A. They'll do things like improve their customer review scores if they're in support, for example, and so forth. So there is no inside out in this threat model. This is just an insider pwning your people, pwning your processes, and pwning all of your tech across your entire ecosystem. So how can you protect yourself from that? It's very, very difficult. Monitoring and emulation, I think, are the key. And so emulation here is an interesting concept. You should have specific detections that are insider focused, which is to say you've gone through the thought process of understanding the ways in which you are vulnerable to insiders and decided that even though they're high false positive detections or whatever, that you're going to put in place queries and ensure the telemetry is there to make sure that you can actually catch those insiders when they do those bad things. You can test that by actually emulating this, right? So almost every large corporation has some sort of a pen test muscle that they exercise. If you don't, if you're small or mid-size, go hire an external pen test team to come in and do a real exercise as an insider, right? There's a big difference between saying, can my users be phished? The answer is yes, of course they can be phished. Can I be password sprayed? Sure, probably. Can you defend yourself against somebody who knows how your organization works, that knows where all the keys to the kingdom lay? If the answer is you don't know, then you should try it, right? Run an exercise where you give somebody global admin privileges. Can you catch them? That's the question. Second thing here is you should control privileged access, even for insiders. We always like to say that collusion is the bar. It sounds like a weird bar, like why would you want to have collusion be the min bar? But the idea there is that for privileged type of operations, you want at least two people turning the key, right? So you've got the main guy who's going to do it, or the main girl who's going to do it, and you should have somebody else that's verifying whatever it is that they're doing is okay, right? When you do that, the only way that they can defeat that particular process is if they're in it together, which is not to say that they won't be in it together, right? Two people is a pretty low bar, but it's better than no people, right? You should review all of your business processes. Insiders, since the motivation is key, understanding how people are incentivized inside your company and all the ways that people touch money, how they have special access to things, how your business process supports their career growth and so forth, and then thinking through how that process can be subverted is essentially how you can build a threat model for an insider threat landscape. And this last piece is essentially a repeat of that. You should understand the threat landscape. You should be transparent, you should be honest, and you should be creative, because the bad guy, the insider inside your organization, will be all of those things. So don't be afraid to threat model this. It can be scary to think about the guy next to you being a bad guy. He's probably not, but you should still think through that. Okay, native tools. So native tools are essentially how modern threat actors are operating in today's landscape. The adversary is usually advanced persistent threats, state actors, but then also criminal enterprises. Their victimology is everybody, especially you. Not especially you specifically, but corporations, people that have access to intellectual property, that have access to power, that have access to money. That is who they're going after. Their tools and tactics is fairly complex, maybe the most complex of all of these. Malware is very difficult to position inside of an organization, and it's hard to build, right? You have to hire developers. Is anybody in here had to hire a developer recently? It's really hard to hire a developer. There's, in theory, millions of developers in the world, but it's really hard to find and hire them. These malware guys, to find a developer that can write malware is way harder, right? So it is not something that they consider commodity, although there are a lot of commodity malware. It gets detected fairly quickly. So if they want to build something special, they have to invest a lot into it. It's often considered overkill. These bad guys can achieve their goals without having to build all the fancy stuff. So they have learned to, quote unquote, live off the land. They leverage native tools, mail rules, PowerShell, native search tools. They're used in most attacks. They don't have to build malware to achieve these tactics. It's there. It's like we already deployed it for them. It's all well managed. It's very resilient, very reliable. and so that's what they use. And so just a quick review of some of these attackers. This is the kind of canonical list of them. Unstructured hackers, script kiddies, they're just trying to cause trouble. People that are trying to do intellectual property theft, they're doing industrial espionage. That might be other companies, it might be threat actors that are related, or state actors that are related to companies. And it might be just like hackers who are trying to resell to other companies. Rogue insider, users and admins, might be retaliation, disgruntlement, IP theft, and so forth. We already talked about that. Hacktivist, these guys are politically motivated. They're trying to embarrass you as a company because you've done something completely and totally evil, and they just want the world to know how terrible you are. It can be very, very disruptive for that. Funded terrorist groups, those are, again, they're halfway between a nation state and hacktivist. They often have a political motivation, and national infrastructure disruption is oftentimes what they're going after. And the last one here is nation state. This is espionage, political disruption, intellectual property theft, and so forth. So that's the full inventory. That's all the bad guys. Actually, I would add one more to this list, which is just regular criminal organizations. People are just trying to steal your money, and there's a ton of them that are trying to do that. So how does this native tools thing work? It's basically the attacker gets access to your organization and then just uses those tools. And there's a long list of them. This is a subset of them. Password spray, mailbox rules, PowerShell, impersonation. Impersonation, by the way, stack ranks to the very top of the bad list because it is not something that most people have detections for, and it gives an attacker access to not just like infrastructure and stuff, but access to every user's content inside the ecosystem. Search and then e-discovery. Search, like mailbox search, is very powerful. It's getting better all the time. It finds really great stuff with all sorts of brilliant ML behind it. What it means is that bad guys can find what it is they're looking for much more quickly. And then e-discovery is the last one here, or the next to last one here, and that is just a really great way to do a robust cross-mailbox content search that results in a nice downloadable package under the auspices of a rigorized process, right? We're all terrified of lawyers. Are there any lawyers in the room? Oh, good. So we're all terrified the lawyers are going to have a go at us, and so e-discovery process is often one that the lawyers are requiring, and so we are like, oh, I don't know, whatever, the lawyers are doing their thing over there. So the bad guys know that, and they use e-discovery to exfiltrate content. The last one here is things like Flow. So Flow is basically a workflow implementation tool that Microsoft has. You basically say, it's a trigger-based thing. You say, if this happens, then I want that thing to happen. It does have some decent management policies that are in place for it, so you don't exfiltrate data from one place to another, at least from like a protected boundary to a not protected boundary. But there are a ton of techniques that have been implemented to like trigger specific types of entrenchment activity or recon activity and so forth. So it's stuff that you have to look for. And then attackers just use that and they just do whatever it is they want inside your organization. So how do you defend against that? The first thing you should do is manage your security policy. Sorry, I'm parched. My voice is extra creaky today. You should manage your security policy. Most of the native tools, you need them to operate, but you probably don't need them all the time, and you probably don't need them totally unbounded. So when you think through the understanding the threat landscape piece, and you make the list of all the things you have to have, figure out what else the bad guys use and turn it off. If you don't need POP, if you don't need IMAP, if you don't need EWS, if you don't need e-discovery, turn them off. Because those are vectors that you now don't have to manage. They're just off. And now you can monitor if somebody turns them on, and then that becomes like, a high quality detection for yourself. You should control privileged access. You should not have very many admins. The Microsoft tenant has, at any given time, a single-digit number of global admins elevated. It's 350,000 people work for Microsoft. They have less than 10 global admins elevated at any given time to do specific tasks. I don't know how many global admins you have, but you could probably do it less than what you've got. The just-in-time and the just-enough access to things are harder to implement, but they can have big payoffs, not just in terms of security, but just in terms of narrative, in terms of like calming down your leadership and saying, no, we don't run around with standing access, right? We're just regular users until we need to do something, and then we elevate, right? So it's a good internal narrative for your companies. Detection and response, those are really, really important. There's a lot of effort put into detections, not a lot of effort put into response. If I were to encourage you to do anything, it would be to take whatever detections you have and make sure you've got a response action for all those detections. Stack rank them in terms of like how bad they are for you, and then like, okay, if this happened, this detection fired, how would we respond? What is and not just like, well, somebody would like pick up the phone and then we would get on and then we would spin up a bridge, but like what is the automated recovery action that you would implement if that particular bad thing happened, right? It's this big, lots of detections and then almost no response actions. The response actions are overly generic or very painful, so you become reluctant to implement them. And then the last thing here, of course, is understanding the threat landscape. Okay, oh great, I have 7 whole minutes. Threat hunting is a very interesting, different sort of exercise. Does anybody in here do threat hunting as a regular, I see 2, 3, a handful of folks. Okay. All of you can do threat hunting. It really only takes a pile of data and a web browser and you can figure it out. And it is like, it's just the scientific method. It's really simple. You start with a theory of the case, right? You're like, how am I going to be attacked? My organization is probably breached right now, right? You should all assume that. Assume you're breached. And then once you know that, you're like, well, who has probably breached me? Right? So in this particular case, I'm going to say I've been targeted by Leafminer. This is an Iranian nation-state actor. And Leafminer is known to use credential harvesting. They do discovery, just say they do like process dumps and drive enumeration and things like that. And they do collection tactics. They exfiltrate that stuff off the box in a bunch of different ways. They also achieve those tactics by performing techniques like password spray, admin group enumeration, and cross-mailbox searches. And they accomplish that technique using toolkits like Mail Sniper. And so what we are typically accustomed to is detecting the tool, the individual indicator of compromise, the IP address that they're operating from, the DNS thing, the hash of the file that the malware is doing this. But you can't do that in this particular case. Mail Sniper is a PowerShell script that lives on the attacker's box, right? It's connecting through the front door for all this stuff. But if I look for indications that specific techniques or tactics are being used, I can reduce dwell time and I can improve my detections by backing them up. So what does that look like? So I'm going to demo, by the way, I'm going to demo Azure Sentinel. I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of Azure Sentinel over this last week. It is just one of many scenes, right? You can take any place that you have data, you can do threat hunting. The Microsoft Blue Team uses PowerShell for most of their threat hunting. They do some like Cosmos DB script hunting and stuff, but they don't have a fancy SIEM to go and do all this stuff. So you can use any SIEM. Splunk, you can use ArcSight, you can use Sentinel, you can use a lot of the CASBs allow you to do this. The difference is you're not just looking at alerts and you're not just looking at logs, but you're looking at TTP-driven queries that give you an indication, not like a, this is definitely bad, but just like a, huh, that's weird. I should dig into that a little bit, right? So in the Azure Sentinel portal, by the way, setting up Azure Sentinel to work with Office 365, so I built the Activity API a billion years ago. If you guys hate it, I'm sorry. But getting partners to integrate with that API was really, really hard. This Sentinel setup, it was, I'm not kidding you, like 3 clicks. It was dead simple to get Sentinel set up with Office 365 and have it starting ingest data. So it is not a hard thing to set up. So in my test tenant, which has like almost no users, I injected all the logs in here. And when I go to logs, I can do a query. And when I look at the query for Office activity in some period of time, this is the last 24 hours, like let's say last 7 days, and run this. It can be hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, even millions. There's over 2,000 records. There's like literally 2 accounts on here that are active, generates 2,000 records. If you have over 100 people, I would argue that you will not be able to just look at logs and look for malicious activity. It's too much noise. Like you can't scroll, you can't hit page enough to be able to go through all of it. So just like querying logs in this way is not an effective way to do a hunting exercise. So enter hunting. There's a great session that you guys should all go watch about doing hunting with Azure Sentinel. What it has is a set of pre-built queries that maps to MITRE ATT&CK TTP tactics, right? So here's initial access, here is execution, here is persistence, credential access, discovery, exfiltration, collection, and so forth. When you build that theory of the case that I just walked through with LeafMiner, you can now start to say, oh, well, if I see that they're injecting mail forwarding rules, and I see that they have injecting rules in multiple mailboxes because they're just sort of enumerating all these accounts and just injecting mail and they all go to the same place, that's a good TTP. That's probably something wrong. In this particular case, there's no result here. But if I look at new admin account activity seen, which was not seen historically, which is to say it's net new, I now get 7 results. So this query was just out of the box. I didn't even, I set this up last night at like 11:30. Not to say that I'm a last minute guy, but you know, I was busy eating my steak and getting my drink on. There's a nice query here that's sort of pre-built, and it allows you to just very quickly query. You can look at those events, and those events that are going to pop up here, maybe not, who knows, those aren't a real detection, right? Those are just events that looked a little bit anomalous, but they serve as a starting point that you can now take those and do a real forensic investigation. So you can do threat hunting on a dynamic basis, starting with a theory of the case, setting up queries that help give you a tickle, right? They get you started down a path to say, all right, nothing there, nothing there. Oh, weird, probably a false positive, but now I can go and investigate and do some other stuff. All right, so these aren't actually gonna come up. One thing I do wanna point out for you guys is there are Jupyter notebooks that the Sentinel team has shipped. These are super dope. These are Python-based interactive query notebooks that allow you to basically have not just run a query, get a count result back, but to visualize the results of those queries. So for all of those TTP like investigation things that you're working on, you can use this notebook to come up with a cool visualization and basically visualize the threat pattern that you think may or may not be in play. And this is trivial to download and set up, and Python is available and it runs everywhere and so forth. Okay, I'm over time. Oh, these are some screenshots of it actually working. So here's the query results here. You see there's a set mailbox, add mailbox permission, set user, remove mailbox location, and so forth. Those are potentially malicious. So now I could be like, who ran an add mailbox permission commandlet? And I can go check that out because that hasn't really been run very often before. This is the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. I encourage you to go look at it. Just go and surf it. Along the top are all the tactics. Below it are all the techniques. At the moment, these are mostly endpoint techniques, which you'll note here that I'm allowed to filter by threat actor group. I selected LeafMiner, and I was able to select a particular toolkit, in this case, Mail Sniper. And what it does is it highlights all the places where those two things map to a particular TTP. And that's it. Thank you guys very much. I'll be up here for questions. Thank you for coming.